Welcome to Level of Crazy podcast, where we learn how to optimize our emotional intelligence, grow those EQ muscles, and therefore spending more time in proactive crazy rather than reactive crazy, healing the divide within ourselves and with each other. And today's show is all about sex plus EQ. What level are you? And I'm so excited because our guest today is Yossef Sagi, a dear friend for so many years. And before we get into it, let me read you his extraordinary bio. Conscious sex educator, a curious mystic at heart, Yossef is on a mission to create a permission field for all beings to feel loved and accepted in our full expression. The focus of Yossef's work is through the complex lens of human sexuality. This starts with deconstructing the causes of sexual shame and creating space for the exploration of our truest desire while maintaining healthy boundaries. Yossef employs a wide variety of modalities, from coaching to somatics to Tantra, BDSM, constant frameworks,
Consent.
consent, thank you, consent frameworks, and sex education, and shapes shifts between professional coach, body worker, ProDom, spiritual guide to create unique experiences that pierce straight to the soul. Yossef, aka Daddy Magic, hosts the Mystery Temple, a personal development workshop disguised as Los Angeles' fastest growing conscious sex party, facilitates sacred sexuality and consent workshops at festivals, conventions, and works with individuals and couples on healing their intimacy and relationship to their heirs. And before we get into it, per request, we have included a donation link for all those people that would love to support our work. So that will be found in the show notes below. And let's get into it. So let's talk about sex, baby. Na, 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 na. Remember that song?
That's right. I don't remember who that is. Yes, but it's
Salt.
definitely from my childhood. Yeah.
Yes, that was Salt and Pepper.
Salt and pepper, that's right. All the good things and the bad things that may be. That's right. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So, Yossef, oh my gosh, we finally did it. We have been trying to get on this conversation, on this call for so long, and here we are finally doing it.
Yeah, it's good to reconnect with you after all this time. I remember back in the day, I was mostly third wheeling it with you and your ex at the time. And we had a lot of fun. And it's just great to reconnect after all these years in different context.
Yes. So let's get into it. You know, we go way back. We are from the Kabbalah days. And Kabbalah is definitely a powerful spiritual, life that we shared, and so many things that I know I learned. I won't speak for you, but I definitely learned so much, and I continue actually to take classes because it is an ever learning process. But today I want to talk about, we're going to talk about this very, very sensitive topic, right? Of sexuality. And the conversation and the question, the task for us, Yossef, is to solve the mystery of how do we make sexuality healthy so that we can ultimately be healthy, and so that we can use sexuality to optimize our EQ. So no small task, right?
That's right. Yeah. And I think it's one of the best places to really go and explore your emotional intelligence because of how edgy it is. And when we think about intimacy And the idea of, intimacy, some people sort of joke, it's into me you see. It's being vulnerable enough to let someone look into you and see your emotions and all your different parts and all your different feelings. And we all crave intimacy, but because a lot of people don't know how to form intimacy, they bypass through connection through sex, because sex is vulnerable and sex is intimate. But because people aren't doing the work behind it, then sometimes that intimacy is something very surface level or temporary and doesn't really get you to where you want to go. So I think we're subconsciously really craving intimacy. And that's why a lot of times we have sex, but we don't end up having as intimate sex as we could. And that's where we really can benefit from the overlap between exploring sexuality and exploring emotional intelligence.
Yeah. So let's get into it. By first, I want everyone to understand, who are you? What do you do? What is your work all about? And how can why I wanted to have this conversation with you is I've been following you for a while. And I noticed that you went from, it was a very interesting transition that you've had. You went from being a teacher, right, of spirituality, teaching kids, to this other extreme, from what I've seen, is some very, um, shall I say, racy stuff. And so it's interesting to see your progression and your transformation. So let's dive into what is it that you do, and then we'll just go from there.
Sure. Yeah, so when I was teaching kids way back in the day, I was teaching social and emotional intelligence. So very similar to what you're always talking about. And the work I do today is obviously adults only. But I'm basically blending a variety of different modalities that I have available for me. I've always been a teacher and an educator, so I love educating and sharing wisdom and information around exploring sexuality. I also am a coach, and so I bring in the techniques of guidance and questioning and curiosity into the mix. And throughout that time, I've also started garnering these other skills as well, which is exploring somatics. And what that means is the wisdom of the body instead of just the wisdom of the mind. And that happens a lot through partly might look similar to coaching, but it's a more guided experience or meditative experience through the body. And it can also be more hands-on, including body work or including BDSM, kink, using uh, domination and submission type relationships and scenes to have further deeper exploration around how the body and the psyche respond to different stimuli around sexuality.
Mm.
So it's a wide variety of different things. So, when someone signs up for a session with me, every session is going to look a little bit different. There's a whole buffet of different modalities, and you can sort of pick or choose what you want to do. And I do that for singles and couples. And then I also do bigger workshops and then also big events. So there's a variety of different ways that I do what I do.
Nice. Okay. So, in essence, you really are, from what I understand, you really are helping people get more intimate. You're trying to help people heal these divides that maybe they're having with each other because of
Mhm.
these unresolved sexual issues.
Yeah, because the majority of us don't really get a proper sex education when we're young. And what I'm saying that is, even if we got a good sex ed program in school, which is very rare, that usually, even if it is a decent program, that's going to talk more about the technical aspects of sexuality, but not what we're talking about here, which is the meaning and the emotional aspects of it. And because of that lack of education, a lot of kids learn it in different ways. And a lot of times those ways are steeped in shame, whether it's religious conditioning or cultural conditioning or ancestral conditioning. There's a lot of shame that gets passed down from generation to generation. And most people don't start with a healthy relationship to their sexuality. And it's one of the most important things for us to learn. And we don't really talk about it much. And that's why I want to talk about it more and more.
Yeah. So I want to read you an excerpt from my book, which I think we can keep diving into as we go here. So the book hopefully will be out sometime at the end of this year, I'm hoping. And so let's get into it. So basically, I speak about sexuality in this context. So sexuality is always a sensitive topic. Given that we are emotional and physical, social and spiritual beings, we need physical touch, both non-sexual and sexual, when appropriate. It is said that if you could get at least 7 hugs a day, you would be very happy and content. Yet, many of us don't even get 1 hug a day for a variety of reasons, and that impacts us on our human psyche. Touch is one of the 5 senses for a reason, and that's because we have a biological need for touch. We are born and yearn for our mothers and fathers' tender love and care, both physically and emotionally. We know that children raised with little to no healthy or too much inappropriate touch suffer from certain mental and emotional trauma. This usually causes them to grow up into traumatized adults who tend to act out in all kinds of dysfunctional ways if not treated properly. Therefore, learning to discern healthy and unhealthy sexual and non-sexual touch and behavior is vital for our level of crazy. And
Right.
yes, and so let's get into that. I mean, how much of that do you hear from your clients that you work with?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to touch on this point. We, as humans, we are social creatures and creatures that do require a good amount of physical affection, both sexual and non-sexual, as you were stating. And the 7 hugs a day thing, it's not just like one of those bro hugs where you sort of tap in. For a hug to count as a hug, it's got to be about 20 seconds. And the reason for that is that about after 20 seconds of a close hug, your body starts releasing oxytocin, and that regulates your nervous system. And the reason that we are social creatures and social creatures that particularly require physical affection is because of co-regulation. As humans, we learn to regulate our nervous systems together. Of course, you can do it on your own through breathing and through different exercises and mindfulness, but we were designed to co-regulate. That means regulating with another person. So when you're in a cuddle with someone else and you're breathing together, it improves and quickens the nervous system regulation process. And when you have a more regulated nervous system, you're less reactive, and you make better decisions, and you have less stress, you're healthier, everything just gets better. And like you were saying in this quote from your book, a lot of us aren't raised with the right type of touch. It's either not enough or sometimes inappropriate touch. And like you said, it can create a myriad of different types of issues. But a lot of people, maybe who didn't have the right type of touch, they either get used to not getting it, and then they just don't, or they're looking for it, but they don't understand the difference between just looking for a platonic touch and sexual touch, or they think the only way that they can access is through sex, and they crave it. And especially that happens for men, because women learn that and do share platonic touch with each other more than men share with each other. So men rarely get physical affection if it's not through sex, which is why so many men really crave sex, where they're really craving is the physical affection, even if it's platonic. From women, from other men, it's really, really important. But because there's a stigma around that for men and a stigma around receiving that kind of emotional support and being held, they go to what is socially appropriate, which is having sex. But because of the way they're doing it, it's only a quick fix. It doesn't really last. It doesn't really solve the problem. So that's why it's so important to be really clear about why you want what you want, why you're doing what you're doing, and relearning all of these old patterns.
Yeah. You know, that brings me to a movie. I wish I could remember the name, but it was a movie about a guy who would have sex with like a cajillion women a week, you know, and he would watch porn and like he would just go on these binges. And eventually, at the end of the movie, basically, like, or excuse me, throughout the movie, he starts to develop this relationship with this woman. Actually, her name was Esther. That's pretty funny. Um, and she was an older woman, and somehow she helped him heal this issue with intimacy.
Yeah,
And once she did that, he no longer had this craziness with the porn and the, you know, having sex every
yeah,
5 minutes. So it really helped him a lot. And then he was able to have like a healthy relationship and,
yeah.
you know, yada, yada. So it's very
Don John
powerful.
was
Ah,
Don
that's
John.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's it.
It is a
Okay,
good
very
movie that
good.
illustrates really well the issue, yes. And she basically helped him through his mommy issues by sort of but sometimes in BDSM, you can do like a mommy type scene. That wasn't explicit in the movie that way, but she helped him by sort of taking on that archetype for him, even though it was a sexual relationship, it wasn't like playing out his mom, but it was this energy that he was missing out on, which is an intimacy, and emotional, intimate connection. Yeah.
So since we're talking about that, what can, you know, the listeners, let's just say there's someone out there listening and they have mommy daddy issues, whatever, and it's no judgment around it. It's just to like, how do they solve it? What can they do to start to heal those relationships with those two individuals so that they can start to uncover some of these wounds and then fix them?
Yeah, so just to clarify a little bit about like this idea of mommy and daddy issues, which we throw those terms around. Those aren't like official psychological terms, but the idea is that who we are today is an output of the experiences that we went through. And for most people, those experiences happen with their mother and father figures, although can happen from things at school and friends and other places as well. And so, because who we are is the extension of what happened to us, there's a lot of things from our childhood that could use healing. And a lot of the times that can be explored through the relationship that we had to our parents. What is it that we didn't get enough of? What is it that we really craved and that we didn't get? What is it that, what type of relationships, and emotions were shown? Which types of emotions weren't shown? What did we learn? Was there too much attention, not enough attention? Like all those different things will have an effect on us. And it's a endless process throughout our life to explore those things and not let them control us anymore. And the more we can do that, the better. And the beauty is that when we're in relationship with somebody else, we don't have to co-parent ourselves by ourselves anymore. Right. So we're throughout our life trying to give ourselves everything we didn't get in our childhood, either consciously or subconsciously. If it's subconscious, then we might make choices that actually don't end up being good for us. But if we're conscious about what we're trying to create for ourselves, we can do better. And then if we're in relationship with someone else and we can properly communicate those things, then we have an opportunity to help co-parent each other's inner child as well.
Yeah.
Not that you have to, because then that becomes codependent, but because you can, because you love the person that you're with, you have an opportunity. So then if you're in a relationship with someone, both of you get to be the parent of both of your inner children and to give yourselves everything you needed.
Yeah, you know, that's very true. I can tell you that in my relationship with Tom, we've definitely have grown and shaped our relationship in 5 years that we've been together. It's really been an ongoing process. And we came in, obviously, like every couple, we come in with certain baggage, right? And certain behaviors and patterns. And it's through the process of just being vulnerable and being humble and being willing to love that person more than you love your own garbage, right? More than your own ego, more than your own pride. And
Yeah.
and seeing that I want to be with this person so much more then I want to have my ego running my life, because so many people destroy their relationships because they um love their ego more than they love the person they're with, right?
Yeah.
And I'm talking about relationships with family too. It doesn't have to just be
That's right.
a a person, you know, a romantic relationship. This could be with mother, father, sister, cousin, grandma, whatever, right? We love our own pride and our own egos more than we love the people in our lives. And that is vital for sustainable relationships. If you can let go of that part of yourself, you will be golden and your relationships will be amazing, you know?
Yeah, the little tweak I would add on that is that a lot of times when we learn about like, oh, you need to like overcome your ego, what that leads to a lot of time is people judging parts of themselves and being hard on parts of themselves. And I would say that the work around ego isn't about cutting it out, but it's about integrating it. If it's exists in your life, if it's a part of you, then it has permission to be there, it has a reason to be there. And so I think it's less about like loving your ego less and more about changing your relationship to it instead of trying to protect it, is to just love it and accept it as it is. Love and accept all your parts as they are, and love and accept your partner's parts as they are. And when two people are doing that together and just bringing more love and acceptance to themselves and to each other, that's how you build intimacy and connection.
Actually, you're so right about that. That's actually where Level of Crazy came from.
Mm,
Because the concept of, you know, recognizing and managing the crazy was because I did that, you know, for
yeah,
myself. Like I embraced my level of crazy and said, okay, wait a second. There's this part of me that is amazing, but there's this other part of me that is, you know, it is what it is, and how do I work with this thing? And so that's why I coined the phrases reactive crazy and proactive crazy, because we have both.
yeah,
And how do we transform the reactive into proactive, and how do we spend more time in proactive,
mm,
right?
yeah,
But it doesn't mean get rid of the reactive, because sometimes you can't. It's part of you. And I always say, if we can learn to, you know, recognize and love our own crazy, then we can love and accept that in others,
right,
right?
exactly,
So it really
exactly, yeah,
makes us more compassionate, makes us more loving.
yeah.
So okay, great. So tell me, you know, how do you see shame and not feeling comfortable with your sexuality, and how that affects our EQ? What do you think?
So this is actually a perfect segue from what we just spoke about, because what is shame, right, as opposed to guilt? Say shame and guilt are two of the lower resonating vibrations, energies, feelings that we have, and they're different. So guilt says what you did was wrong. Shame says you are wrong. So that's a really important distinction because you know, everything has its reason why you experience it. When you have guilt and you around an action that you did, it can sort of help you correct it and be like, okay, I'll choose differently next time. But shame is something that's more deeply rooted, because shame is saying you're wrong. So that means, oh, if I'm wrong, there might, you know, I have to change. There's then I'm hopeless, or there's nothing I can do, and that creates a lot of self-judgment. And so when we one of the places we have the most shame is around our sexuality. It's built into some religions. There's this concept of original sin, and that we were born in sin because of our relationship to our sexuality. And even if not everybody believes that, a lot of people definitely act that way, that there's something dirty or wrong about our desires. And when we believe that there's something dirty or wrong about a natural desire, it becomes repressed. And when something becomes repressed and doesn't have a healthy outlet anymore, it's going to come out in unhealthy ways. And that's where the emotional intelligence comes into play a lot of times, because when you repress For some people, it goes by repression. So you repress all of your feelings and you become you sort of stonewall and you just don't feel as much of anything anymore. And for some people, the emotional expression comes out in other ways because that energy, if it doesn't have a healthy way to come out, it's going to come out as anger, it's going to come out as frustration, it's going to come out as depression, it's going to come out in different ways. So when we can release shame, we can have a fuller experience of everything else on the spectrum in a
Yeah.
healthier way.
Yeah,
Does that make
exactly.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And how does that, how does that affect now how we live in society, right? Like, how does that, how do we conduct ourselves now as a confident, productive member of society when we have those kinds of issues going on?
Right. So it becomes really hard, right? Everything is guarded. And it's like what you were saying. There's the essence of who we are, but around the essence of who we are, there's these two layers that we show up for the world. There's who we think we are, and usually who we think we are isn't very good. And then there's who we want other peoples to think we are, which is what the shell that we put on top. That's the ego. That's like, oh, here, look at who, and we create that second layer in order to compensate for that first layer, right? Where the truth is, if instead of trying to compensate for that first layer, you recognize that all these parts aren't garbage, they aren't bad, you just loved all your parts, then you wouldn't need either shell and then you just show up in the world more authentically. So the way that we relate to most people is we have our two shells and they have their two shells, and that's how we're now 4 layers apart from heart to heart. That's how far we are from each other because we each are approaching through the mask that we wear, which guards this false image of ourself, which then guards the true self. And that's a lot of distance between those two hearts. So if we can just shed those different layers, and one of the best ways to do it is shed the shame, because the shame is the reason that it's all there in the first place, then we can connect more heart to heart. And that's true for romantic relationships, for family, for friends, for business, for the way that we relate to the world in general.
And what do you think that we're ashamed of? Like, what is it that we're so ashamed of? Is it, is it
Desire. Yeah,
it's what?
what we're one of the things we're most ashamed of is our desires, our natural desires, that I want something. I mean, that more, in sexual desires for sure, there's a lot of shame around that, but just desiring things in general, because we are conditioned that if you want something, you're selfish, right? And that you should be selfless. And even a lot of spiritualities say, remove your desire, right? Don't have desire. And so we repress that desire. And that's where it comes from. That's where the shame is. The shame is around what we want. And then there's another type of shame, which is around what we don't want, which is just the flip side of the coin, our boundaries. We're ashamed to share our desires and we're ashamed to share what our boundaries are.
One of the things that I feel that has helped me with my sexuality and with my ability to recognize and manage my level of crazy is the ability to really get more comfortable with my body, myself, right?
Yeah.
And this happened early on when after my first marriage, and I was in a place where I was really, actually, no, I'm sorry, after both of my marriages, after my second divorce, when I realized that, hold on, there are things here that I really need to deal with if I'm going to have a healthy relationship again one day. Now, after 2 divorces, you don't ever think about, okay, I'm going to have another relationship. You kind of take a minute and go, hold on a second. What's going on here? And it was really at that time where I was able to really get more comfortable with myself, and I was able to start to almost like I would put myself in situations where I had to face my own I guess embarrassment, my
Mhm.
own vulnerability within myself, right? With myself. and
Yeah.
do, whether it was masturbation or this or that or whatever it was, but I had to do what I had to do in order to shift this way of thinking so that now I didn't have this self shame or embarrassment or this vulnerability or whatever it was. And that made me a better lover. That made me more
Hmm.
vulnerable now to allow a partner, to enter into my life, and together we could experience amazing sexuality. Because without that, I couldn't do it. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
would have been bumping up against the wall over and over again, and it would have been very difficult. And so many other areas would be affected,
Yeah.
right? Like
Yeah.
it would affect my just every day. It would affect an everyday process, maybe confidence, self-confidence, self-esteem, feeling like, did he, was I enough for him? Was I beautiful enough? Why is he looking at that girl? Like all the things that were before for me an issue no longer were an issue because
Right.
I was now a much more healthier sexually, was a much healthier person. I was stronger, I was more confident, I was more like, yeah, I got this. You know what I mean? Could you
Yeah.
relate to that?
Well, that's exactly it. You did your own work and then you brought a more whole version of yourself into your next relationship. And that's where it starts. And people sometimes think that they can't explore their sexuality on their own. It's not true. You get to learn about yourself, about your body, about what brings you pleasure, about what you enjoy, about what you don't like. You can do a lot of that work on your own. And the more that you do that, the more you have to bring to a relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, so how do you recognize and manage your level of crazy?
All right. When you say level of crazy, just clarify that for
Yeah,
me. Like, what does that
so
mean to you? Yeah.
okay. So, because we have the two parts of us, right? The reactive crazy is anything that disrupts our internal
Mm.
peace. So, it could be anger, frustration, depression, sadness, anything that just completely makes us fall off the internal peace wagon. The proactive crazy is all the things that keep us connected: joy, happiness, peace. We could be super creative. We could be imaginative. We could be an excellent communicator, right? Like, and we're crazy communicator. We're crazy passionate. We're crazy excited. We're uh, crazy Zoomer, podcaster, whatever. So it's anything that really just keeps you connected to self and others. So when I say, what do you do to recognize and manage your level of crazy? It could be either way, but in this context, we're talking about sexually. How do you give us the tool in this situation to be healthier in terms of sexuality so that we can be a healthier person with our EQ?
Right. So, in more broad strokes, how do I manage my level of crazy is by observing it. That's always the key, is by observing it, not being resistant to the process, not being not having so much tension around what's going on. I find the more I can release the tension, the more I can release the resistance, the faster that all these emotions move through me. They say what you resist persists, it lasts longer. So when there's something that comes up and I can just observe it without judging it and just allow it to do its thing and allow it to pass, that manages my level of crazy. And it is something that I also recommend in the realm of sexuality, is to slow down and pay attention, because so many people, when it comes to sex, it becomes goal oriented. We're gonna go for the orgasm. That's the key, right? After we have an orgasm, we know it's been successful. And that's a lot of how Western civilization works. It's very goal oriented. So the idea is to switch it to being process oriented. It's the goal. It's take that goal of getting an orgasm off the table and instead be present and be aware of and pay attention to what is. Pay attention to the pleasure in the process, not just in the destination. And the more you can slow it down and the more you can enjoy the process, the more you end up discovering very different ways to relate. And it keeps things interesting, keeps things fresh, and it elevates the possibility of the pleasure that does eventually arrive in the orgasm as well when you slow it down. The longer process that you take to build up, the more it pays off at the end as well.
It's interesting. I've read somewhere that these three uh, factors create movement for change or motivation for change: money, sex, and God.
Hmm.
Right? And these three elements are factors for change. And so it's very interesting because when you think about it, exactly with what you're saying about the goal of sex, right? So usually men are wanting sex, right? So what do? They pursue a career. So they have money. So they have, a way to now have a car, a house, status, whatever, right? So that they can win the girl. And then the
Right,
girl is the ends to the mean of the sex, right?
right.
So it's like everything that you're saying here. So it's exactly right on. I totally agree with you that when you take that goal out of the equation, now you can actually experience this journey of this beautiful experience that you two are having. And it's such a beautiful moment, whether it climaxes to an orgasm or not. You know what I mean?
Right.
You just have this extraordinary experience. And if it's done the right way, you can actually strengthen your relationship. And it's very, very powerful.
That's right. Yeah. And what you were talking about also is like a bigger problem in society, which is the commodification of women's sexuality, particularly this idea that it's true that a lot of men pursue money and power in their life to be able to gain access to women and through that their sexuality. And what that ends up creating is that women learn that they need to sell their sex in a way that you wait that if men have to gain access to power and money to get access to sex, then women use sex to gain access to power and money. Now, the more that we work on, or what we've seen in countries where there's a less of a wage gap, it changes the dynamic because women are making their own money. So then they don't need to
Mhm.
sell their sex for money, right? And then what happens is you have very different types of relationships that go on. And there's, issues that exist everywhere, of course, but this idea of taking out the agenda out of the sexual encounter and not conflating that with money and power and all those other things and just being present with it is going to yield a more pleasurable um, and more connected experience.
Yeah, and on the same conversation, the same topic is that when women use it as punishment, right? Or men,
Yeah,
regardless,
yeah,
when a partner uses sex as a punishment or a reward, for to the partner, right? So for example, like um I'm upset with my husband tonight, so I'm not giving him any sex tonight because he pissed me off, and that's it, right? Or vice versa. I'm
yeah.
withholding love from my wife because she's, this or that, and she, also pissed me off. So there's this back and forth of using sexuality as a way to harm each other.
Mhm.
And that is another element I think that people need to understand, that when you're doing that, you're not helping the situation. Let's just put it like that. You're making it worse. Right?
Well, yeah, exactly. If you're going to use it as a weapon, then it's going to have a violent connotation to you. You know,
Yes.
everything gets the meaning that you attach to it. So if that's the meaning that you end up attaching to it, then that's what's going to be perpetuated for you. So it's very important to understand what's your intention when using this very powerful force, source of energy that we call sexuality.
So, how can we help, as we're coming kind of to the ending here, how do we help the viewers become more comfortable with their sexuality? What can we leave them with that they get off this show and they go, you know what? I'm gonna go try that.
Yeah. So I'll tie it back to what I said a little bit earlier, which is slow down and pay attention, right? Without judging, just slow down and pay attention. And this is something you can do solo or you can do in partnership. So if you're doing it solo, take some time to explore your body, not just your erogenous zones or the obvious ones, but your whole body. Give yourself different types of touch, maybe light touch, maybe more firm pressure, tickles, nails, like try or feathers, try different things. Explore your whole body and just pay attention to what you enjoy, what the sensations are, what you don't like so much. Learn about yourself like you did, right? And the same thing you can do in partnership where you just take turns exploring each other and giving each other feedback. You know, there's one thing that everybody knows to give very specific and precise feedback on when they're being touched, and it's when someone's scratching your back. Right? When someone scratches your back, you ask for a back scratch, you know, to say up, down, to the left, to the right, harder, softer. Like you can be so precise with what you want, and there's no shame around asking for it. It's very like natural. But when it comes to sex, there's now a story. Or if I tell them, they're going to think that they don't know. It takes the, romance out of it. They should just figure it out. Treat everything like a back scratch. Be very precise with what you're asking for. No one's going to get offended if you say harder or softer or whatever it is. Just ask for what you want. So, giving yourself permission to explore that way, be very precise with your desires, very precise with your boundaries, is good communication with your partner. And it lets you learn about yourself because the more we speak it out loud, the more we become aware of it. The reason that we have shame is because we haven't spoken it out loud. So we remove shame by speaking it out loud, and then it allows it to flourish more and more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I agree with you 100%. I also would add that and that's a great tagline, treat everything like a back scratch.
Yeah.
That's a great tagline. I would also add to that it will remove the embarrassment factor, like the judgment, right? The self, which also plays into shame. It will remove the self judgment away from you about this sexuality, right? Like, oh my
Yeah.
God, I'm a dirty girl or I'm a dirty boy or whatever it
Yeah.
is, right?
Yeah.
And we live in this like weird zone of going back again to shame. But instead, when you do learn more about yourself, that's my quote. When you know and understand yourself, the world will know and understand you too.
Exactly.
So there's no shame, there's no guilt, there's no judgment. It's all love, it's all amazing. And I think with that, I think that's a wrap. Oh, before we do wrap it up, Tom had a very important question for you,
Okay,
Yossef.
sure. Yeah.
So Tom, my partner, asked, how can I get more sex?
I think it's a question for you. If he asked you that question, what would you say?
Actually, right after he asked it, it was very funny. He started laughing and he gave me a compliment and said he doesn't have any issues with that. So we're good.
Okay, you're good to go. Well, I think that's a good the question is the answer is communicating. It's like, okay, it's important for me to have more sex. What would make that available? You know, what would it take?
Exactly.
Exactly, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So, all right. So this has been an amazing conversation. I hope y'all had a drink there with you, and maybe you need a cigarette after this conversation. I'm not sure. I'm not a promoter of cigarettes, but hey, you do what you have to do. But as always, so excited to have had the opportunity to have Yossef on. It's been a pleasure to see you again and to reconnect with
Yes, my
you.
pleasure as well.
And so let's wrap it up with my quote. If you know it, do it with me. And if you don't, just hang on tight. And we'll see you on the next episode of Level of Crazy. So here we go. So when you know and understand yourself, the world will know and understand you too. And remember, what's the best that can happen? And now let's go get crazy. All right, guys. See you next time or listen to you next time. All right. Take care.